Notice how suspicious. Tom, you want to do the honors?
Thank you.
I promise you.
I have a resolution by the Spring Hill Historic Commission. Whereas the African American Heritage Society of Maury County and the Maury County Library did jointly apply to host a traveling exhibit from the Smithsonian institution called Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. And whereas the African American Heritage Society of Maury County and the Maury County Library were successful in their application. And whereas the African American Heritage Society of Maury County and the Maury County Library did host this exhibit at the Maury County Library from August 19th through August 1st, 2023, thereby making it available to everyone in the area, as well as people passing through the community. And whereas the exhibit Voices and Votes, Democracy in America contains not only material from the Smithsonian Institution describing the growth of democracy in the United States, but those revealing the contributions toward that process of people in Maury County as well. And therefore, the Spring Hill Historic Commission commends and thanks the African American Heritage Society of Maury County and the Maury County Library for their successful efforts in securing and presenting this collection. Passed and adopted by the Spring Hill Historic Commission on the 8th day of February 2020. Do we have a representative from the library here? Maury County Library?
Oh.
We can get this.
So thank you for all you're doing to share a message.
Thank you so much. I'm speechless, and that's hard. That's really hard. And thank you for inviting me to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is history of Maury County. And it's all history of Maury County, because our history is so intertwined. And, you know, it's not, and I like to think about history of Maury County, not just Black history, it's just history of Maury County, because it is a complicated topic, and it's very, very interesting. Dana told me that I could talk about the society, and I wanted people to understand, those of you who are not familiar with who we are and what we do. The society was founded in 2012, and we had some specific goals. And one thing was, you know, why was this society necessary in 2012? I came back to Maury County in 2020, and I started researching my family. And as I started researching my family, I just noticed so many things about African American history that wasn't documented. The first thing that I did, and it took me 5 years to do it, I documented all of the African American cemeteries in the county because they were not included in the two previously published books. But then I started looking at the history, and it's a county history. It's not a white history or black history, it's a county history. And what we want to do is to bring forward the African American history, and then one of these days people can look at Maury County's history and see all of the history and see how the history is intertwined. And it really is intertwined. And you need to, and I have, and I want other people to have an appreciation of the fact that it's just not one history. Our mission is, the society's mission is to preserve the history of African Americans in this county. We had some core strategies, and one was just to increase the knowledge base. You know, let people understand what this history is. And then to identify and complete historic preservation projects, and I will share with you some of the projects that we have completed. And also to increase our capacity to support community-based programs. And increase the public awareness of the organization, secure an exhibit for an African American Museum and Cultural Center, and we're in the process of working on that now. That was a part of our strategic plan back in 2014, and we wanted to build a reputation as a serious preservation organization before we move forward with something as big as an African American Museum and Cultural Center. So we're ready to leap into that, we think. And then we need to broaden and diversify our funding. So that's why we're here. In the educational series, we have had since 2012 quarterly lecture series. And we didn't have some during the COVID issue, but except for that, every quarter for 12 years, we had a lecture series. And we always use subject matter experts and people from Fish University, Vanderbilt University, Meharry, and Tennessee State University. So these people were professors of history. And then we had a series of activists, authors, and historians that were subject matter experts. And our most famous one, I think, was Dr. Bernard Lafayette. He was with Martin Luther King doing, he was a part of Martin Luther King's civil rights activist group. He went to school in Nashville, but he was like all over the United States. And I happened to meet him and invite him to come, and he was here in 2018, I think. The other thing that we do as far as community outreach, we have 2 traveling exhibits that we allow people to use free of charge. And one was here at the library a few years ago. We have 2 now. One is called Path of Freedom, and that was the one that was here. Now we have one called the Education of Maury County, the African American Experience. And these exhibits are easy to carry, and they are available to anyone who wants to use it, and free of charge, because we want to share the history, we want to get the message out. The other thing that we have done is we have installed 5 official Tennessee Historical Commission markers. We started that in 2014, and we've done 5. We have a long list of sites significant to African American history that we're trying to get markers for. In fact, I'm working with someone at a local church now to get a historical marker for that church. We're also working to get a Civil War Trails marker. I'm working with the young man in, I think he's a National Civil War Trails organization, to get a Civil War Trails marker for a Civil War soldier. And then the other thing that we do as a fundraiser, just to share that information, we have published 9 African American history calendars. We started with the Rosenwald schools, and then we ended up this year with coaches. At Central High School, the high school made history by appointing African American head coaches. So we did this calendar featuring the coaches that Central had recently promoted, and also some of the coaches that had been appointed in previous years. We also partner with a lot of organizations. The Albert Gore Research Center, we worked with them to do an oral history project. They wanted former teachers, so we found a list of former teachers for them to interview for the Albert Gore Oral History Project. Albert Gore is a part of the MTSU organization. We work with the Center of Historic Preservation. With the Center of Historic Preservation and the James Walker Library, which has completed a 4-year project that is called Places and Perspectives, and it documented African American history from 1860 to 1920. And that database will be available to the public soon if it's not already. And of course, we partnered with the Public History Department at MTSU. What we did, I think we started it in 2014. The master's students needed topics to research. So the Public History Department contacted us. We gave them a list of topics to research, and they used it for their master's dissertation. So, and that collection was recently donated to the Maury County Archives, which is very interesting. And then, of course, we partnered with the Tennessee State Museum. This Tennessee State Museum recently had an exhibit that featured the Rosenwald schools, and we served on the board of scholars there. And in fact, that is going to become a traveling exhibit, and that exhibit, a part of that exhibit, is going to be at the Maury County Public Library. We're hosting it again, hosting that this year at the Maury County Public Library during the month of August, I think. And of course, this is Smithsonian Institute. We partnered with them. Hopefully we'll be partnering with them on some other projects. And then our favorite partner and very supportive partner, the Maury County Archives and the Maury County Public Library. So that's what we do, that's who we are. And like I said, our big project now is trying to acquire this property for a museum and cultural center. And we're in the process of purchasing the property, and we're putting together a campaign, and we're trying to make sure that the stories that we have uncovered will be told in the future. So, if you have any questions about the society, please. Good. Now, democracy in America. The theme of the exhibit that we had from the Smithsonian was Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. And we used that theme last year for everything that we did. And it was exciting, and we learned a lot about Maury County with that, because we also had to do research to include a companion exhibit that talks about the people of Maury County that promoted democracy. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of those individuals that fought for democracy, the right to education, the right to vote, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion right here in Maury County. The first group that fought for democracy here were the United States colored troops, the Union soldiers. And I think it was Frederick Douglass that said, once let the black man get up on his person, the brass letter U.S., let him get an eagle on his button, a musket in his hand, a bullet in his pocket. There's no power on earth that can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship. And Frederick Douglass said this probably in 1863. So one of the first things that we did was to honor the men who fought with the United States colored troops from Maury County. We found in our research over 400 African-American men from Maury County that enlisted in the Civil War of the Union. And then we found that about 125% lost their lives in battle or from illness. During the war, there was a lot of illness during the Civil War, and people, they died of smallpox and other various diseases. And in doing this research, because I have an ancestor who fought with the Battle of Nashville, I knew that there was information available. So I wanted to find out more about some of these men who actually fought there from Maury County. And I ran across this story of Isaiah Hadley. He grew up in the Carter's Creek area, and he and his family lived on a Hadley farm. His father had passed. His mother was not in good health, but he wanted to join in that fight for civil rights. So he arranged for a local merchant to give his money to make sure that his mother had food. He sent payments back from the war to pay for this food, and this merchant provided the food, watched out for his mother, and then this guy, Isaiah Hadley, went off to the Civil War. Unfortunately, he was one of the ones that passed. He died of disease. And then there were two other brothers that went to the Civil War, and they left a mother, a brother, and a couple of sisters. This brother was 5 years old, and he ended up being the first African American to write a cookbook. But in his cookbook, he wrote this introduction that said that, my brothers went off to war. They died. When they went off to war, I was only 5 years old. I had to carry the water from the creek. I had to take care of the cows. I had to remove the chips, whatever that was. I had to do everything. And then eventually he and his family moved to Nashville. He went to school, and then he became a Pullman servant, a service. He cooked, he learned to cook, and he was the first African American to write a cookbook. And some of his clients were President Cleveland and President served while he was working with the Pullman service. But, I mean, these are like stories of African Americans that were so wanting their civil rights, the rights of freedom, that they were willing to sacrifice a lot. One of my favorite people of Maury County, he had a son that fought in Massachusetts, and his father wrote. His father was a minister, and his father visited with a group of African American ministers. His father met with Lincoln and met with Johnson, and he sent a letter back to Lincoln with I call them a position paper, a pamphlet that said he urged African American men to join in this fight because if they did not, they would lose everything. So this person was Ann McClellan, and I will talk more about him later. But there was someone else that fought for civil rights. He was a white guy. The transitional period from enslavement to emancipation was like difficult and complex here in Middle Tennessee. And there were enslaved people who escaped and became emancipated and continued to work. But then there's some people that stayed and lived on the plantation. And there were white citizens who were typical slaveholders, and others did not have slaves. But there was this guy named Samuel Arnell. Samuel Arnell was born in the Zion community. And the quote that I have for him was of Maury County. The quote I have for him is that Tennessee forced in 61 into rebellion. Back again in the Union. Colored people in the state have been clothed with citizenship. Gaze today with a free look at heaven. Samuel Arnell fought for the rights of African Americans to vote. When the country was split over the slavery, Arnell's own convictions remained pro-union, which was an uncommon viewpoint here. Arnell began to give speeches across the country based on Lincoln's commitment for freedom. And when Fort Sumner was attacked, Arnell was giving these speeches, and his life was in danger. So he had to leave his life and start something new. He became a very unpopular figure in Columbia. They began to identify when Governor Johnson who was like President of the United States, worked with Lincoln to bring Tennessee back into Union. And they began to identify the unconditional unionists who might become political leaders to make sure that the sectionalists would not retake control of the government. They picked people who believed in the abolition of slavery. So Republican Brownlow was elected governor, and Arnell was elected to the state legislature. And one of Arnell's most significant legislation was disenfranchising the former Confederates. And then he also fought for black suffrage. And the bill granting the freedmen's civil rights passed in 1867. Arnell also did something else. In addition to the rights to vote, Arnell and his friend James Baird established something called the Freedmen Savings and Loans Bank. This was the first opportunity that the African Americans, that the former slaves, had an opportunity to save their money. Arnell's, I think, greatest legacy was he used his political influence to help the formerly enslaved people to help themselves on the road to citizenship. Another person that I think was interesting, his name is Henry Eddy. You may know Henry Eddy, Dana. Mm-hmm. Henry Eddy was a Union soldier that came to Spring Hill to start a school for the former enslaved students. And what I like about his quote is that he basically saying is that given the former slaves the opportunity, they can learn, they can be as successful as anyone. Just give them the opportunity. Eddie wrote in his diary, in fact, I spoke with one of his descendants a few years ago. His descendant came from Maury County trying to walk in the footsteps of his, I think a great-great-grandfather. And I was able to contact him, and he shared a copy of his diary at the Maury County Library, and Maury County Archives rather. But in this diary, he wrote that he found that the African American students, the former slaves, were eager to learn and well behaved, and that was something that was not clearly understood. He was not well received in the community. He taught school in a cowshed. He actually lived with a black family in the Spring Hill community, but they eventually were able to buy a small lot, and they built a school on McLemore Street, which became the Spring Hill Public Library. The location became the Spring Hill Public Library because the Freedman School was near the cemetery, and then that somewhere in that area.
Same building.
Same building. Okay. But anyway, Henry Eddy was a person that believed that the formerly enslaved kids could learn to read and write. They just needed the opportunity. Now, my favorite person is a Reverend Edmund Kelly. And I'm not sure how much you know about him, but I talk about him all the time. He was the first African American to be ordained a minister in Maury County. He was a co-founder of the Mount Lebanon Missionary Baptist Church. In 1853, because his owner was having some financial issues, she gave him the right to leave Columbia, and for that privilege, he sent her $10 a month. A few months later, he bought his wife and children from James K. Walker, who was James K. Polk's brother-in-law. He was the one who was with the delegation of ministers that met with Abraham Lincoln. Edmund Kelly's son, because Edmund Kelly so wanted the former slaves to fight, he wrote in a document that he sent a copy back to Lincoln that said, I sincerely trust the colored people will never wait to be drafted, but volunteer to a man. While the white people hazard their civil and political rights, the colored people lose both in their freedoms besides. Like I said, his son fought with the Massachusetts 54th Unit, and Frederick Douglass's son also fought with that. Now, Edmund Kelly traveled extensively throughout the southern United States promoting the rights of African Americans. But in 1876, during a contentious election between Hayes and Tilden, Edmund Kelly wrote this other pamphlet, and he basically said that never vote for an unqualified person because he is white or colored, be he your friend. Never vote against a qualified man, whether colored or white. Never vote for a man just because he's your personal friend. And never, never sell your vote. Edmund Kelly, 1876, wrote this. And this is one of the documents that I found filed with the Lincoln Papers at the Library of Congress. Another voice of democracy from Maury County. I found that he traveled all over the South. I call him the little Energizer Bunny because I saw a newspaper article where he was in Alabama. I saw a newspaper article where he was in Knoxville, Tennessee. And he was just all over. He came back here to Spring Hill in 1872 and started the school and church that is now the Mount Zion Church on West Chapel Road. He came back in 1872 to start that. He is my little Energizer Bunny. And oh, by the way, you may be interested to know that I was contacted a couple of months ago by the New Bedford, Massachusetts Historical Society, and this man wants to collaborate on a book about Edmund Kelly, because when Edmund Kelly left Columbia, he ended up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and in fact, when he left here, he had 4 children. 2 of his kids were born there. Edmund Kelly is buried there, but that became their home base. But he was always back here in Tennessee. He was always all over fighting for democracy for African Americans. And he is someone that I think everyone should know about, especially in Maury County, because of his contributions, not only just in Maury County, but his contributions across the southern United States. One of my other favorite people, he wasn't born here, but he was a doctor. And he attended Meharry. He came to Columbia in 1896 and opened a medical practice. And he was like very poor, so he had to walk to see his patients. He eventually built up a reputation. He opened a drugstore on South Main Street. White physicians started calling on him to help them with difficult surgeries because he was very skilled. In 1901, he established a newspaper called The Index. He was the president of the Negro Physicians. He was president of something called the National Medical Registry. And he fought for democracy in Maury County. And he said 20 years from now would see separate coach laws, partisan ballot, and other laws against Negroes in the South repealed. He was fighting against, in 1901, he was fighting against the black codes, the Jim Crow laws in the South, in Maury County. The other person that I think is very interesting also is that, and he's the person that we're working on a Civil War Trails marker for. He was born in Maury County, in Pulaski, but he ended up coming back to Maury County. He was a builder, and he was president of something called the Good Government Club, which was for the purpose of electing fair and firm, impartial boards of mayor and aldermen. 1901 in Maury County. But he and former slaves established something called the Richland Creek Baptist Association, and what it was a unified group of people that wanted it was a group of people that wanted a unified church organization. So they had churches in Maury County as well as in Alabama and other counties in Tennessee. And he was the business manager for this home mission, and they built churches. They built several other churches here in Maury County. In fact, they built Mount Lebanon Church, which is the oldest congregation. He was born in Pulaski, I mentioned. He was 16 years old when he volunteered. He was too young to go to the army, but he was 16 years old. He lied about his age, and he was 16 years old. And then when he returned, he came back to participate in this community building. He taught. He attended the Central College. Once he was a while, and then he was married to a lady named Sarah King. Sarah and John Gilmore had a son named Lucius. Lucius was the first African American commissioned officer in Maury County, Lucius Gilmore. And he's buried in Rosemont Cemetery. John Kelly, someone else who contributed to Maury County community building, a voice for democracy. He said, the past is secure, but of the future, who can tell? It is only in the bosom of the great God above who knows what the future holds. We will not give up, not surrender a foothold of advantage grounds of freedom. J.H. Kelly, he was one of Ann McClellan's sons, born in Bedford, Massachusetts. He was studying law. He came down here and he saw that he was needed as an educator. He is the one that started the very first public school for African Americans in Maury County, College Hill School. In addition to that, what I think is even more important, there were no trained teachers. We're a separate school system. Black teachers were needed. He started something called the Maury County Colored Teachers Institute, and they trained teachers in the art of teaching. And every summer, they would have 85 to 100 of these future teachers going through this institute. And before they could be hired as a teacher, the superintendent, the state superintendent of schools, or the county superintendent of schools would come down and administer the test and decide whether or not they were qualified to teach. And I think that is like really significant, because in listening to my family history stories, my mom started in one of those schools, and when her teacher, who ended up being my teacher, when she started teaching school, she didn't have a degree. The woman who was my mom's teacher, who was my first, second, third grade teacher, by the time I was in third grade, she had her bachelor's degree. By the time I was in seventh grade, she had a master's degree. So this idea of education, it was like very, very important. But then when I looked at her history, it made sense. Her father started in another community, not too far away, started a church and a school, and he operated a school like in the middle, like 1860s, 1870s. And she was like one of his students. So it was understandable that she would become a teacher, and they would carry on that legacy in that family. His father was, her father was Sid Foster. But all of this is all connected. You know, you can look at one person and see how and why they're so devoted to the community building by looking at the generation before them. The same thing with Ann McClellan. I'm sure his father influenced him. His father didn't learn to read and write until he was 16 years old. His father hired boys to teach him how to read. His father would work all day, waiting tables, and then at night, he said that he would come in and pray to God that he would wake up by 11 o'clock so he would study, for lessons the next day. So you can understand why some of these people are who they are, or they did what they did, if you look at the generation before them. The other group, other people in the 1940s who fought for civil rights. There was a Julius Blair who said, we're not going to have any more social lynchings. And then there was a James Morton who said, I realize the Negro Business District is referred to as the meat slide, but I prefer the bottom. These are people in the 1940s who were fighting for civil rights. Calvin Lockridge, he was a minister in one of the churches on East 8th Street, and he was one of the leaders during the Columbia Uprising. Calvin Lockridge was asked by the National NAACP organization to travel to talk about the situation in Columbia. So Morton and Blair and Lockridge were key figures in the prevention of what they thought was another lynching in Maury County in 1946. And that event is significant because there were a lot of things that were going on in the South at that time. The situation in Maury County happened February 25th, 46. On February 13th, 46, there was another veteran who was violently attacked while he was going home from World War II. So this was something that was going on in 46, and the situation in Maury County added importance to what was going on across the country in 1946. In my generation, I went to a segregated school. The Maury County Colored Schools, Maury County schools were not integrated until 1968. That was anyway, 14 years after Brown versus Board of Education, 14 years after that. And they were only integrated because there was a young woman who was fired, and Maury County's school system, fired the Maury County school system, and they said that she was fired because they ran out of Title I money, or Title II money. And then they hired white teachers who were Title I or Title II money. And then she fired them, she sued them because they said they didn't have money, and then they hired some white teachers. Then the board said, well, we really fired you because you were incompetent. So she filed a lawsuit. It was Hatton v. Maury County School System. And then going through that lawsuit, they realized that Maury County in 1968 had not integrated their schools. So this person, James Colwell, who happened to have just been my science teacher, he wanted to keep the black schools in the community. They had Carver Smith High School, they had College Hill Elementary School, a Macedonian Elementary School, and they had already closed all of the rural schools. So he wanted to keep the schools. And then with him and Ms. Hatton and other people filing that lawsuit, it just highlighted the idea of the information that Maury County had not integrated schools 14 years after Brown versus Board of Education, which was interesting. The other thing, democracy at work now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
This young man, I knew personally because his parents were friends. He was a smart kid, and he was at Carver Smith, which was a black school. He transferred to Spring Hill School. He ended up being the valedictorian of Spring Hill High School, 1969. He had I can't remember his grade average. I think it was 95 point something. He was 95.7. His name was Zachary Holmes. He was Spring Hill delegate to Boys State. He represented the school in numerous oratorical contests. He was the president of the Beta Club, editor of the annual, and member of the choir.
And he worked in the school library.
Yes, he was a smart dude. I still communicate with him, although he's ill right now. He ended up going to Vandy. He got a degree in engineering from Vandy. He ended up working on the NASA program. Smart kid, really a smart kid. And but this is democracy at work. He was able to, even it's 1968. He started at Spring Hill High School in his sophomore year. He was able to. His education was such that he kept up, and he was able to have the highest GPA at the Spring Hill High School at the time. And he was the first African-American valedictorian at, I think in Maury County. I know at Spring Hill, but I think in Maury County. The other person on my list is a guy named Lyman Johnson. He is very interesting too. His father was a slave. His grandfather, his great-grandfather was a slave. His great-grandfather bought his family, but his great-grandfather went to his owner and said, oh, I have somebody that wants to buy me, so will you sell me? So the man says yes. So the next day, he said, he brought in the money and a bill of sale. The bill of sale said, sell Dyer Johnson to Dyer Johnson. So the slave bought himself, and then he purchased his family. He built a little log cabin on Maple Ash in Columbia. That log cabin still stands. I went into that cabin with his son in 2018. This cabin still stands. And this is another family where the legacy continues. His father ended up being the second longest running principal at Carver Smith. His uncle ended up being the first African-American president of Roger Williams University in Nashville. And then he was in Kentucky. He filed a lawsuit against the Kentucky University for the, it's like called a day law, which said that African Americans could not go to school in the day. So they had to go to night school. So he filed that law and he won. Filed that suit and he won. And then he worked in Kentucky to promote civil rights in the libraries, in the parks, in the theaters, public accommodations, in the housing. He received in Kentucky over 200 awards and honors, including in Kentucky there's a school named after him. There's the University of Kentucky named a dormitory after him. He was born and raised in Maury County, went to College Hill, although at the time he was going to College Hill, it wasn't a high school, so he had to go someplace else to finish. But this is another generation of men that fought for democracy in America, in Maury County. Which is really sort of interesting. In I think 1997, a guy named Wade Hall wrote a book about him, his autobiography. And in that autobiography, Lyman talks about his time here in Columbia. And he tells a story of how he went to the Maury County Public Library, and they would not allow him to use the library. I just wonder, Dana, what they think, what he would think about the library now, when we have African Americans who are leaders.
Library director.
He's already directed, right? So what would Lyman Johnson think now? But his quote is, "The name of action in this country is politics. Justice begins at the ballot box." And that sounds like what I get from talking to his son. As long as we had no political power, we had no rights in this country. When we began to be a factor, a lot of politicians began to take notice. We've come a long way from no political voice to electing our own people in positions of leadership. Lyman Johnson. He died in 1997. Too bad I didn't get a chance to meet him, but I did meet his son. And Tom and I interviewed his son on the radio show, History Spoke. But it's an interesting family, interesting legacy. And unfortunately, well, we do have some of those families still left here in Maury County. We do. So, do you have any questions? Yes.
Can you, because I taught about this when I was at Spring Hill High School years ago, they call it off, it's the Columbia Riot of February 1946, and there's some disagreement on everything I read said Thurgood Marshall played a significant role and the sheriff went after him and so forth. What have you found on that?
I found that there's a story, and there's an interview that someone named Juan Williams did on PBS a couple of years ago, where Thurgood Marshall talks about him being, when they left town, about him being followed by people in a police car, and he got the impression that they were going to hang him. But then when he went back, they took him back to the town because they accused him of drinking. They took him back to town, and they realized that he had not been drinking, and they let him go. Thurgood Marshall, based on my research, did not play a major role here. Thurgood Marshall was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Education Group. Thurgood Marshall, when he heard about the situation, what happened was Mary Morton, when all of this happened on February 25th, Mary Morton called someone in Nashville that, in fact, called NAACP. They contacted Z. Alexander Luby. No, they didn't even contact Luby first. They contacted someone who was in Chattanooga. They sent a guy named Maurice Weaver over here, who was a white lawyer in Chattanooga, who had been working on civil rights cases. Maurice Weaver and a black guy who looked like a white guy named Walter White came to Maury County. They were the first ones on the ground. Thurgood Marshall came later, and as far as the trial, he participated in the jury selection, and they ended up interviewing about one number was 400 people, the other number was like 700 people, trying to find a seat the jury, and they ended up deciding that they couldn't, and they asked for a change of venue. Thurgood Marshall asked for them to change it to Williamson County or Davidson County. Instead, they went to Glassburg, which according to the records, they have worse race relationship than Columbia. So Thurgood Marshall participated in the change of venue, okay? Thurgood Marshall was sick, and he did not come back until October or November when that last trial started, and he replaced a guy named Leon Ransom, who was a strategist on the case. So Thurgood Marshall, jury selection, and then he was the assistant to Luby doing the last trial between Pillow and I can't remember the other guy's name. And but Thurgood Marshall was not the chief litigator here. He became the Chief Justice of the U.S., but he was not the chief litigator here. Yes.
Thank you for putting faces to the voices. How would you suggest that we allow this history that you presented to inform our decision-making now? Not that that's a loaded question. Well, it's a part of the role of history, right? Is to, we learn from history to inform what we do now so we don't repeat it, or we hope not to repeat it.
You know what? I hear all the time that people say, oh, we need to keep telling all these stories because we don't want to repeat them. What I say is that treat people like they're people. You know, I don't want you to look at me because I'm African American. Am I the only African American in this room? I don't want you to listen to me, look at me because I'm African American and think that you have to treat me differently than you would treat anyone else. You know, I raised my children probably the same way that you raised your children. You know, most people are, the people that I like to hang out with, they are devoted to their families. They are grounded in their faith. And people are just people. And I grew up in a small farming community, and there were black and white families there. And when you're poor, you're poor. Or when you're po, you're po. You know, so, I mean, and people help people do things. So as far as history, look at what happened. And don't try to, and I don't want you to tell me, someone said to me the other day, you hear about legends all the time. You hear about the race right all the time. Where's the balance? Let's talk about these people sometimes. You know, February 1946, February 1946 to October, November 1946, this county started in 1907. We're in 2024. Tell me something that was positive. Tell me about the L.D. Youngs who worked on the NASA project. You don't even know who he is. He went to one of these little country schools. He worked on a NASA project. He has a book that he wrote. Tell me about a guy named I just completely forgot his name. His name is McClain. That was a research scientist in Chicago. He went to I think it was Center Star, a rural country school. Tell me about my old high school boyfriend who's a federal judge. Tell me about people who actually did something with the size being lynched. It's important that every story is told, but there are so many other stories that should be told. And Black History Month is really sort of difficult sometimes for me. This year, the society participated in 7 Black History programs. I had someone who I went to high school with, I went to college with, said to me, I don't like Black History in Maury County. I said, why is that? You don't want to talk about negative. They don't talk about negative stuff. And I said, we don't talk about negative stuff. The African American Heritage Society is trying to get people to understand that the African Americans did something. Talk about Zachary Holmes who worked on the NASA project. You know, there are so many people that I could tell you about that did more and contributed more, you should see my list of hidden figures. I mean, you haven't seen it. You know, and the list, all of the elementary school teachers that taught in those rural schools, and what they had to do, and what those communities had to do just to build those schools. You know, those schools were not built with county money. The communities donated the land, the citizens worked, built some of the buildings. The county only put in a third of the funds for that. And then, the salaries. We had something called Jean's teacher. Her salary was paid out of a fund that was donated from a little Quaker woman in Massachusetts named Anna Jeans. Talk about the real history. Don't dwell on this like negative stuff, but tell the entire story. If you tell the complete story, people can understand there's more to our history. But if you're only telling this story, that's all they know. And I have had my friends say to me, my doctor, my new nephrologist, he said, "You live in Maury County?" Yeah. He was here from, I think he was from Philadelphia or someplace. "You live in Maury County?" I said, "Yeah." "How long have you lived in Maury County?" I said, "Except for 30 years, all my life." You know? So, but that is the attitude that people are getting. If you're gonna talk about the Columbia race riot, talk about everything. Talk about the Columbia race riot. One of the strategy senators was in Morganville home. Talk about those women, generations of widows of these men that ran that funeral home for almost 100 years in a Jim Crow era. Talk about that. Talk about how they managed to do that. How these women managed to keep this business going. Talk about that. Talk about my principal of the high school, that when he died, he didn't have any children. He set up a scholarship fund, and so did Cabbage Walker's daughter. Set up a scholarship fund at Columbia State and TSU for African Americans from Maury County to go to school to become teachers. Talk about those. These are the stories that we need to tell. There's more to this history than.
I'm curious, were any of you at the session that the speaker series did on African American First in Spring Hill? Some of you were. And I think some folks in that audience, Gwen knows some of the people that we're talking about in that, but that audience was Sandra Buford did the presentation, and I think there were some folks in the audience, particularly who were not from here, who were a bit stunned that we had an African American alderman in the 60s. There's perceptions, and we all face them. And I want to say this in front of Joanne because she's taught me so much. When we had our first conversation about the 1946 riot, I had called her and was a bit stunned that her perspective was not the same perspective as some other folks who talk about the history of the 1946 riot in Columbia. And I got off the phone and called her back and said, "I'm sorry," because I had lumped her in. I thought her perception would be, as an African American woman, would be the same as all other African Americans, and it wasn't. So when she says, "Look at the individual," she lives looking at the individual.
That's what's important. And there are just so many stories. But you know, Alicia, I grew up watching my grandfather get dressed up every time he went to vote. He put on a suit every time he went to the polls to vote. It's important. So this is how I grew up. I grew up in a rural community, you know, so that may be different too. But I didn't grow up thinking that I have a different view. And I taught my child differently, and hopefully my grandchildren are.
I've met her son.
So it's history. It existed. You can't change it. Okay, why are they not talking about the Civil War? Look at what happened in the Civil War. You follow me? Why not talk about the Civil War? Look at all the deaths in the Civil War. You know, there are so many times we've had so many points on that history line where things just didn't happen that good for us. You know, why pick out this? And then why not talk about all of the positive stories?
Which is why we're having them back this afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
this is a conversation that we need to have. Joanne's, research and influence. Benny has some brochures in the back for the African American Society. Please join, they have some great speakers, it's usually the time that I can't make it, but they have some great speakers. There's also, they do a calendar every year that has some of these folks, African American influential leaders, and even African American community leaders who didn't set out to change the world, but they changed their community.